Well, thank you for asking that. There is a group called Interact on the internet, and it's a group that advocates for young folk who are intersex, and there's some really, really exciting things happening there. There's a groundbreaking lawsuit based out of South Carolina, which is very complex and very fascinating. I encourage your listeners to read up on that. I mentioned before I worked at the Intersex Society of North America. It is now defunct, but thank goodness its website, isna.org, is still available as a teaching resource. It has fantastic frequently asked questions and definitions and things. If you are the parent of an intersex child, you might want to go to accordalliance.org, and that's where you can get a fantastic handbook for parents, how to explain to your daycare worker that Mary's body is a little bit different and don't be upset, that kind of thing. What do we say to grandma and grandpa?
Oh, yeah.
That kind of stuff. How to find a good child
psychologist. How is PFLAG for intersex families?
You know, I encourage anybody with a loved one who is a sexual minority to seek out the community and the support that you get from PFLAG. I don't have a direct answer for your question, but I can tell you that I've spoken at PFLAG groups throughout the Pacific Northwest probably 100 different times, and it's the most gracious, accepting, affirming audience that I ever speak to. I don't need to explain what it means to be different to those people.
Yes.
And when I am talking to people who want to be activists and resources in their own community as an intersex person, I always say go to PFLAG first and cut your chops there, because you will be embraced. And it's all about practice, you know, the public speaking thing and getting your elevator speech down, and that's the most warm and welcoming place to do it.
I often refer people to PFLAG all over the community because they are a wonderful, open and affirming, and the families, PFLAG is for parents and families of all of us unicorns, and and they need support as well.
Yes.
Because, you know, our families and our parents, I would say in the trans community, you know, I went through my journey of transition, but then everybody that's in our inner circle has to walk that with me.
Yes, yes.
And they have to go through their own journey. And so one of the interesting things is their journey, I've been further ahead in my journey, we have, if we're walking it, because we've been dealing with this and thinking about it, even if we haven't voiced it for a while before we have, and then they're trying to play catch up. So our journeys may not walk side by side, they may have to play catch up. And we have to, I think even those of us on this side of it have to be patient and understanding and give them time to walk their journey with it as well. You know, and supportive. And PFLAG is great for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they can talk to other parents and other families that have gone through.
And even if your situation is a little different, if you share your story with me or vice versa, you can take some gems out of that and some suggestions for how to handle things or process things or reframe things a little bit differently.
That's exactly right. Hey, I want to see if some of our audience members have questions for you. And so I'm going to have them think of their question. I'm going to come to them and I'm going to ask you one more while they're getting their question together.
The pressure's
because
on.
One thing that we didn't talk about, we brushed over earlier in your story that there are different kinds of intersex. Like there are different. So, but I'm curious as to, and I'm sure that we're still in a learning phase with this as well, like we are with all things gender. How many types of intersex are there?
Wow. I'm not a doctor, I just play one on the radio. The statistic I always quote, going back to when I was on a KUOW show years ago, is there's 40 to 60 different syndromes or conditions that result in intersex traits, and 40 to 60 is a pretty wide range. That was a long time ago, and I know from keeping up with the literature and working at Children's Hospital and being introduced to new families and being privy to what the child's actual diagnosis is, I know that there's new diagnoses being discovered every year. So 40 to 60 might now be 60 to 80, I don't know. The reason there's this range between 40 to 60, it's a pretty big range.
It is a pretty big range.
Is there's no general consensus about what it is and what it isn't.
That's interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
So, one of the most common ways to have an intersex trait is something called hypospadias. And that's where the pee hole or the meatus does not terminate at the tip of the penis. It might be on the underside of the head of the penis or halfway up the shaft. It might be small or it might be quite a large opening. It might be such a large opening that it looks like halfway between a vulva and a penis. Because did we all understand that all mammals start out
as
female?
That's right.
Whether it's a cat or a racehorse or a giraffe or whatever. Turns out crocodiles and alligators are different. It depends on how hot the egg is and where it's buried in the nest, and that determines what the sex of the baby alligator in the shell is, but that's a whole different podcast. So when you are familiar with the geography of a male body, you know, changing your baby brother's diapers or whatever, up close and personal with your boyfriend, there is a scar that runs from the anus up the base of the penis and it terminates at the tip of the penis. That's called the penile raphe. That is the evidence that all bodies start out female, because what now is the scrotal sac was the labia majora. And what is the urinary tract was the labia minora. And that scar, that penile raphe, is the evidence of the zipping up of the vulva to make male physiology. And when there's a process, coming from an IT background, endless loops, when there's a process, like a zipping up process, there's always the opportunity for it to get interrupted or stalled. And that's what hypospadias is, where the pee hole doesn't terminate at the penis, at the tip of the penis, it's somewhere halfway down the shaft or underneath the head of the penis. And that, I've heard, is up to 1 in 75 boys and men.
Wow.
And it can be very mild, like the pee hole's not quite where it's supposed to be, it can be just right underneath, and you know, or it could be something a little bit more like Howard DeVore, many surgeries to make that penis look normal, and infections and catheterizations and risk of anesthesiology and all that kind of stuff. So when it's really mild, it's not considered to be intersex. But if it's more severe, then it is intersex. So this is the craziness of the what
and that
constitutes.
leaves a lot of objective thinking to the doctor.
Absolutely.
So there's not strict guidelines. Yeah.
God works in very strange ways, and I mean that jokingly and seriously. I fly a lot, and I would say 6 or 7 times I've been seated next to a urologist. And my husband is sitting. My husband and I was by the seats across the aisle from each other. It's less fighting that way. But I can still pass the Tupperware with cheese in it. And as soon as my husband realizes that I've been situated next to a urologist, he goes, "Oh God, here she goes again. I got this guy trapped from here to Minneapolis."
You pick his brain. Yes,
well, I educate him.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And he'll say, "Oh yes, clitoral reduction, the making of a large clitoris smaller, which is one of the most common surgeries." Is that not mind-blowing?
Really?
Yes.
That's so funny.
Because having a clitoris that's way too big is a medical and a social emergency. What were you going to say?
Wow.
Well, you know, as we trans guys we are very proud that our clitoris grows a lot due to the testosterone.
What if that kid wants that later, and he took, not to mention the nerve damage and all the rest of it. Anyway, so in this conversation, the urologist will generally say, "Oh, I used to do clitoral reductions, but I realize now that that is just harmful and it's unnecessary." Click, 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 sip, sip. But hypospadias repair is my bread and butter business. So there is this total cognitive dissonance there about, I now have awoken to the fact that reducing the size of a baby's clitoris is not a good thing, unless of course the parents insist that I do it, or they're going to go somewhere else and get it done, then I will apply my skill. But hypospadias repair is my bread and butter business. Can you see how those
Wow.
two things are in direct?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's